Guillermo Galdos, you are our Latin America correspondent, and Ben Westhoff, you are the author of Fentanyl Inc. You've both been looking into this deadly synthetic opioid. Guillermo, you've been looking at who's making it. Ben, you've been looking at who's taking it. What are you both going to tell me?
Yes, we're going to talk about my latest report on a fentanyl lab in the mountains of Sinaloa and the effect that fentanyl is having in Mexico.
Fentanyl is not only more potent than any drug we've seen, but it's also cheaper to make. And so therefore, for drug traffickers, it's much more profitable. And the result has been it's causing an unprecedented crisis in the U.S. that's going abroad.
Guillermo Galdos, you're our Latin America correspondent, and you've been following the story of fentanyl in Mexico and the cartels that are making this deadly, addictive drug. Now, the cartels obviously usually deal with other drugs, cannabis, cocaine, heroin, etc. But now they're dealing with fentanyl in very large quantities. Why are the cartels sort of focusing on this product, and how big is the business now?
It really surprised me. I've been going to Sinaloa for over a decade and filming the so-called war on drugs there. But initially, I remember the mountains of Sinaloa were carpeted with marijuana plantations and poppy fields. And this time I was surprised to see that, the fields were dried. There were no poppies, no marijuana. And the answer was that everybody was cooking fentanyl. And it's so cheap to make. They just need two precursors that they import from China. And they're quite easy to import to Mexico, for what the guys told me. And the rest of the ingredients, you can buy them on the local hardware shops. So there you go. I remember, I've seen cocaine, places where they cook cocaine, places where they cook methamphetamine. And this was a lot more serious.
No land is needed to grow ingredients. It's entirely synthetic. It's so easy and cheap to make, it can be cooked almost anywhere. We've disguised the cooks' voices at their own request. Production is quick. If a shipment is seized at the border, there's always more on the way. I have been to narco labs before, but I have never seen anything like this. Huge quantities of pure fentanyl cooked daily.
They were quite keen for me not to film the whole process because, I was asking them quite a lot of questions, and they were trying to avoiding the fact that, the recipe was so easy that they didn't want me to learn it.
And how did you get access to the cartel?
Well, I've been working in Sinaloa for years, and I've established contacts that, in Sinaloa everybody knows who is who, so people know who are the people involved in the drug business in some sort of way. And through one contact that we had there, we asked him permission to film inside of one of the labs. And it took several days, and I had to go and speak with the owner of the lab, and I explained why I wanted to show the process. And at the end, these guys, they have big egos. So it's for them is they really want to show you what they're doing because they believe they're the best ones, cooking fentanyl. I just wanted to know how is that they do it, and why is that it's so easy, and why everybody is cooking fentanyl.
And what is their answer?
The answer is that, there is this narco culture in Sinaloa, a big narco culture where, drug traffickers initially was El Chapo Guzman, now is her sons, and everybody accepts that. And the fact that the Sinaloan society accepted this, years ago, is like you know, you cannot shake it off nowadays. Is completely ingrained in the society, the narco culture. I mean, they have shrines for saints that were the hitmen or the narcos go to pray. They also pray to the Santa Muerte, which is to death.
But I mean, in terms of the wider culture there, when people are singing songs about the cartels, given that, in your reporting, you document how they murder people within Mexico, within Sinaloa, why would they celebrate that as well?
The celebration of, who is the bravest, and young kids, because they grew up very close to people with firearms, money, big cars, they are attracted to that. So the more you can show that, so I think it's very difficult. A long time ago, a guy who was in charge of security in Mexico, he said to me that in Sinaloa, if they wanted to finish with drug trafficking, it would be like shaking a beehive and trying to kill each bee with a pistol. It is impossible.
Guillermo, you paint this picture of, you have, these cartels which clearly have a strong hold in the region and the culture, and then you have the business where they're currently making a hell of a lot of fentanyl, because that gets the money, but also because something we haven't touched upon is there is a huge demand in America right now for that drug.
Yes, there is huge demand for that drug in America. It's very, very, very scary because, I've reported a lot on the war on drugs, and I know that they are now cooking fentanyl in Colombia, in Medellin. I've been told a few weeks ago that they were cooking fentanyl in Medellin, and also that they are cooking fentanyl in Brazil.
Is there a market for fentanyl within Mexico itself or in other parts of Latin America? Or is it mainly America who are consuming it?
No. There is a market for fentanyl in Mexico, certainly.
Yeah.
And recent reports have also mentioned how the cartel that is producing, the Sinaloa cartel that is producing fentanyl, they are trying fentanyl with local addicts to see, if it's too strong, if it's too low. I mean, the amount of fentanyl, and obviously they're using local addicts as guinea pigs, and that's what has been reported in the last few weeks. But if you go to places like Tijuana, for instance, there used to be a lot of heroin addiction, and you could see a lot of people with needles, under the bridge or close to the river. And nowadays, obviously, that market has been taken over by fentanyl or by heroin that has fentanyl, because now they're putting fentanyl to everything.
When you were talking to the men who are making the fentanyl and sort of saying, lots of people in America are dying here, do you have any thoughts on that, etc.? I mean, given there's a great big business in fentanyl, but given it also is incredibly deadly, there was 100,000 overdose deaths in 2021 in America, the majority from fentanyl. Is it really a good business model if you're creating a drug which, yes, it's cheap to make and clearly lots of people want it, but it also has a high rate of killing your clients?
I don't think they do care about that. I don't think that the people cooking it are thinking about that. I mean, and they kept repeating this phrase to me, and it's like, because I said this product is killing a lot of people on the other side of the border. You should know. And then initially they said to me, it's because they don't know how to use it. The dealers should warn them. And then they also said to me, some people think it's like cocaine, so they have a few lines and they die, And then ultimately they said to me, listen, we don't care. The US sends a lot of weapons to Mexico that kill a lot of people as well. And, we don't complain. That's what they said.
¿Piensas que tantos gringos estén muriendo por esto?
No, pues depende. Algunos dicen que se pagan cuando hay material muy fuerte. Pero por ellos hay un problema de ellos, no mismo más trabajo ya. No solo en la fábrica, pues nadie nos obliga que se ponga nada.
Entonces tú piensas que la gente que se muere allá pues es porque ellos no saben consumirlo.
Pues digo yo que sí. Mucho por equivocación que piensa que es cocaína y se mueren también.
I mean, what's the response of the Mexican president and the government? Because I think they've even responded to your piece recently on Channel 4 News about this.
Yes, they basically said that it was fake and that that it was a methamphetamine lab. 1,000% that it was a fentanyl lab. And also he mentioned the fact that I was not wearing gloves, but I was not cooking. I was there watching, and I was not going to touch anything. The most important thing was to have a mask. But I think he's trying to discredit, our work, because he has been denying the fact that fentanyl is being cooked in Mexico. And he thinks this comes from people in America that want to attack him because they are nearing the presidential elections, so they need votes, and they can make votes by attacking Mexico. But I don't have anything against the Mexican president, neither the Mexicans. I love the country, but I'm saying what is true. Fentanyl is being cooked in Mexico. And the president and the armed forces should know about that, and then they shouldn't hide it. They should, talk with all the players involved to see how is that they can stop it, because the truth is that fentanyl can really change the face of the war on drugs. We're talking about something that is extremely deadly, that you can mix with other things, and that is extremely easy and cheap to produce in Mexico. And the fact is that fentanyl is being cooked in Mexico with the help of Chinese precursors. And I'm not the first person who says that. A lot of people are saying that, but the Mexican government is denying that. And my answer will be that you cannot cover the sun with one finger. And this is true. It is happening, and a lot of people are dying. And the truth is, how could you solve this? Well, you could ban all exports of precursors into Mexico. But again, if this is the sort of business that we're looking at, it moves a lot of money. And, that's the problem, because money in this case creates a lot of corruption. And at the end, you can't do anything with money.
Is there a way through this in terms of trying to stop the cartels? Because as you say, the Mexican president seems to deny this. On the American side, there are Republicans who are saying the only way to deal with this, if Mexico aren't going to deal with it, is to essentially send in the US Army itself to go and fight the cartels. It seems like neither side really has a decent solution here to trying to tackle the making of fentanyl.
Well, we've seen lately the trial of the former head of security of Mexico, and how for years the Mexican government had been dealing with the narcos. Obrador says that now he stopped that, but I think that the criminal organizations in Mexico, they move so much money that they've penetrated everything, and for me, is the only solution, to be honest, is legalization, if you want to put it that way, because you've seen how things have changed. Initially, Mexico exported marijuana to the US, and that was the big business. Then cocaine came into the picture, and that was massive business. Then heroin, of course, as well. But the big core was marijuana for a long time. And now that marijuana is legal in America, what had happened in Mexico is that initially they started producing more heroin, but now they've gone more into producing synthetic drugs, methamphetamine and fentanyl, and all the stuff that you get out of those products. I think that this is changing all the time, and it doesn't matter, what it is. If there is a market in the US, Mexico will be willing to produce it.
Guillermo Galdos, thank you for talking to me today. Thank you. Ben Westhoff, you've spent years looking into opioids, fentanyl, and this devastating epidemic that's gone on for a number of years. I mean, firstly, can you just explain to me how severe the fentanyl crisis is?
The fentanyl crisis is the worst drug epidemic in American history, and before it's over, it could well be the worst drug epidemic in world history. Fentanyl is just so cheap and so powerful that it's not just killing people on its own, but it's infiltrating almost every other drug. It's adulterating cocaine, meth, heroin, pills, anything that's a pill or a powder.
And I want to understand how we got here, Ben, because we are more than 20 years into this opioid epidemic in America that's claimed more than 1 million people's lives. And obviously it began when people were being prescribed opioids to deal with issues such as chronic pain. I mean, how central is that first aspect of this epidemic, that first wave, to the story of where we are today?
Companies like Purdue Pharma made these really high potent oxycodone pills, most famously OxyContin, and it was supposed to usher in kind of a revolution in pharmacology for patients who wouldn't have to suffer pain anymore. You know, pain became known as the fifth vital sign. So doctors were supposed to ask all their patients, how bad is your pain on the scale of 1 to 10? And if they said higher than a 7, they were supposed to be given these high-powered opioids. Now, you know, we've known for centuries, millennium, that opioids are addictive, but this new way of thinking started floating around based on this kind of bogus study that maybe opioids wouldn't get you addicted so long as it was just used for pain. But that ended up not being the case at all. And the overprescription of these pills led to millions of new opioid addicted users. And so once their doctors cut them off from their prescriptions, they turned to black market heroin. And once all the heroin was gone, fentanyl basically came in and filled the void.
When do we see the shift in who's producing it in terms of where we are now with China, but also predominantly Mexico and the cartels producing fentanyl?
Well, fentanyl was originally made as an important hospital drug, and it still is. It was created by Belgian chemist Paul Janssen in 1959 as kind of an alternative to morphine. And it was a revelation, really, in the operating theater for procedures like open heart surgery because it came on so fast and it didn't cause nausea. Nowadays, people who are getting epidurals, women in childbirth, men who are getting colonoscopies are giving fentanyl. But that's really not what's causing the crisis. The crisis is being caused by the illicitly produced fentanyl. And almost all of that originates in China. And so about 10 years ago, China started working with Mexican cartels who distribute most of the drugs in the United States. And so originally they were working together on meth. Once meth ingredients, known as precursors, were banned in the United States, that production shifted overseas. And so China has the biggest pharmaceutical industry in the world, and the vast majority of it is legitimate, but they started providing these meth ingredients to the Mexican cartels, and then later started providing the fentanyl ingredients. Plenty of pure fentanyl is made in China too, but that was banned. And so now most of these chemists, these rogue chemists, operate in what's known as the gray market. So that means they're making chemicals that are legal in China, but illegal in the West. And so these fentanyl ingredients, also known as fentanyl precursors, are legal in China. They're made there, and they're made very cheaply and shipped to the Mexican cartels, where the cartels finish the fentanyl, they package it up, and they send it across the border into the U.S.
Is where we are now, is that down to the demand side or the supply side? I mean, on the demand side, are people actually wanting fentanyl? Or are we where we are now because on the supply side, it's just a lot cheaper and quicker to make, and that's why America's being flooded with fentanyl?
Yeah, this is a really different drug epidemic because usually they're, demand driven. Like if people want cocaine, we see more cocaine. If people want more heroin, we see more heroin. But those are plant-derived drugs, right? And so fentanyl is made in a lab, and it kind of changed the whole game, because even though it's an opioid like heroin, it's 50 times stronger than heroin. And so drug dealers, drug traffickers began to realize that it was an incredible cost-saving mechanism. So they started out by putting just a small percentage of fentanyl cut into the heroin. So maybe, 6 parts heroin for 1 part fentanyl. And so they realized not only was it cheaper, but it made the whole concoction more powerful. And users often didn't even realize that their drugs were being cut. There's these fake pills floating around that look exactly like an oxycodone pill, or exactly like a Percocet or a Xanax or something like that. But it's actually cut with fentanyl and pressed up on these pill pressing machines to make them look exactly like the real thing. So this was all this was a change, because this was all supply driven this time. So it's like people didn't even want this stuff, but it was being sold to them. But more recently, something curious has happened, is that it's kind of starting to flip, and now people are asking for fentanyl by name. It's so powerful, addicted users have gotten used to it.
Covering this story from here in the UK and talking to people here, the question is always asked, clearly this is devastating America and parts of North America and South America, but will it come here?
Unfortunately, yes. It's already starting to come to the UK and to Europe. And the way I see it, it's fairly inevitable that it's going to arrive in a big way. It's just simple economics. And for drug traffickers looking to increase their profits, which they always are, there's just no denying that fentanyl is so much cheaper. And not only that, but it's just much easier to traffic. If it takes 50 pounds of heroin is the equivalent of 1 pound of fentanyl, then it's just that much easier to get across borders.
Ben, you've covered this topic for a number of years, and I wondered what your thinking was on the debate right now about possible solutions or how America tackles this crisis.
Well, I've spent a lot of time, I went inside these Chinese drug labs undercover, pretending to be a buyer. I have been to the border with US and Mexico. And what I've learned from all of my reporting is basically that we can't stop drugs from getting into this country, for the reasons I just talked about. It's so small, so powerful, fentanyl, that it can be smuggled, inside of the interiors of cars, can be flown across on drones. There's really no stopping it. And so I think that, to say you're bombing the cartels or this like manhunt for El Chapo's sons, it's just basically a giant waste of money. So really all we can do is try to help people in our own country, the people who need it most. And I think we need to focus on these 2 groups that you and I have been talking about. First of all, the young people who aren't even aware that they're taking drugs that have fentanyl in them. We need a kind of nationally organized education campaign to let people know about the dangers of fentanyl and how to avoid it. And then this other group, which is a much bigger group, is addicted users who are dying from fentanyl. And to help these people, we need more types of medication-assisted treatment, more funding, and better outreach. So something like 85% of people who are addicted to opioids don't receive any form of treatment. And we need to change that in a big way. So we have these treatment drugs, like the most famous are methadone and Suboxone, and also another one that I think is really useful but underused, which is called naltrexone, also known as the Vivitrol shot. And we have these great medications that really help people, but just people aren't receiving it. Even then, we need to go a step further and do, what I would call holistic forms of treatment. So just giving someone a treatment drug isn't enough. We need to help them find housing. We need to help them find jobs. They need counseling. A lot of times it's not just the drug itself, but it's the situation in someone's life. The good thing, the only silver lining about this crisis is that there has been a change in the mentality here. People, politicians, judges, people in positions of power have seen their own loved ones be affected by this crisis. And so there's less of a lock 'em up mentality than there was before. And so I do have some confidence that we're going to keep moving in this direction. The incarceration rates for nonviolent drug offenders really are falling fast. And there is money moving towards things like medication-assisted treatment.
I've read your other interviews and listened to interviews you've done, and you have said that this crisis will get worse before it gets better. I mean, given we're seeing tens of thousands die every year, how can it get worse?
Yeah, I've heard reports that the 2022 overdose death rates were actually worse than 2021. That hasn't been confirmed yet, but and I am, like I said, really worried about the UK and the problem coming to Europe. But in terms of the US, it can only get so much worse before the problem will burn itself out. Unfortunately, I don't think we're quite there yet. And I am afraid that it is going to get worse before it gets better.
Ben Westhoff, thank you very much for talking to me today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kieran.